live to this hearing with the House Ways and Means Committee, and the panel includes everyday Americans who say they were targeted and discriminated against by the IRS. We just received a question, and it continues from Congressman McDermott from Washington State. Let's go ahead and take a listen.
And my Republican colleagues just don't believe, or you believe you should be free from political targeting, but that you should be free from any scrutiny at all. The purpose of a C3 or C4 tax exemption is to enable easier promotion of public good, not political work. It is the responsibility of the IRS to determine which groups are choosing the correct exempt status and which are trying to manipulate the system to avoid taxes and hide political organizations and campaign donors. Without oversight, a status meant for charities becomes a machine for political money laundering. Do you think that's far-fetched? You ought to talk to Speaker Gingrich. Speaker Gingrich in 1997 was fined $300,000 by the Ethics Committee of the House of Representatives for funneling money from the ALF, the Abraham Lincoln Opportunity Fund, into GOPAC, of which he was chairman, to promote the takeover of the House and arouse Republican activists. Now, that's what happens when you don't ask questions. Each of your groups is highly political, from opposing the president's health care reform to abortion restrictions to gay marriage. You are all entrenched in some of the most controversial political issues in the country. And with your applications, you are asking the American public to pay for that work. Many of you host and endorse candidates. The line between permitted political activities and non-permitted political activity can be very fine. And it's important that the taxpayers know which side you fall on. If there were an organization promoting taxpayer funding for abortions, wouldn't you want to know what they were using that political money for, or for what candidates they were backing? What about a group that wanted to promote voting without ID? Or what if in the midst of a few years ago there was an increase of communist candidates in this country, a new communist clubs wanted to be tax exempt? Wouldn't you want to be sure that the self-declared tax-free classification of those groups was correct? The mistake here was that the staff organizing the organizations used the names of the organizations rather than the work they do and ask improper questions to figure that out. It's clearly wrong. It was inept, stupid, and a whole lot of other things. But let's not get lost. During the Bush administration, liberal groups were targeted without any concern by Mr. Issa or anyone else on this committee. The Republicans were looking for a conspiracy where there isn't one. Mr. Issa says he can feel it in his gut that someone's broken the law. Now, you just ask yourself which is more likely, that a mid-level employee is overwhelmed by 4 times as many applications as before, made stupid, irresponsible shortcuts, or that there's an administration-wide plot to take down community organizers. Let's not forget, this happened under an IRS commissioner appointed by George Bush and was investigated by a Republican inspector general. What happened to you was unfair. It was unfair and incredibly inconvenient, but it was a mistake. Our job is to make sure it never happens again. I haven't heard a single word here about what questions you think we ought to be able to ask you about your tax-exempt requests. Anything else, like the circus that's happening in the Oversight Committee or here, is simply political theater. It is diverting attention from what we ought to be doing on this committee, is rewriting the law if it's wrong.
All right, thank you. Time's expired. Mr. Ryan is recognized.
I'm going to deviate from my original question in response to what I just heard.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Chairman.
Welcome to Washington.
The committee will be in order. Ryan has the time.
We heard Gingrich, we heard Bush.
Mr. Chairman.
We had the former IRS Commissioner Schulman who knew about the political targeting long before Congress was told, since implied that the organizations were responsible for the targeting because they chose to apply for tax-exempt status. So you're to blame, I guess, is the message here. Do you think that you were targeted based upon your political beliefs, your religious beliefs, or just because you chose to apply?
Our beliefs, our views.
We had the acting Commissioner Miller here a couple of weeks ago, and we asked him, did groups with the word organizing or progressive in their name, were they targeted? The answer was no. We do know, this is one of the facts we now know, people were singled out because of their beliefs. Back to my original line here. Mr. Kogi? Kokiji, thank you, sorry.
Okay.
You're 29 months?
29 months and counting.
And counting. You haven't been approved yet.
I've not been approved.
You've been asked, one of your inquiries, 90 questions, asking you to provide a list of your members and donors, the political affiliation of your mentors, and your political position on virtually every issue important to you.
Yes, sir.
You're teaching Montesquieu, Cicero, Augustine, de Tocqueville, Washington, and it's 29 months in waiting, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay, Mr. Eastman, I just want to get this one nailed down. Dr. Eastman, excuse me. You have proof that the IRS, an individual or a group of individuals at the IRS committed a felony. You have proof to this, and nothing has occurred to seek or find justice. Is that correct?
That's correct. Federal law requires that we be notified if there's an indictment brought. We have not been. Federal law allows us to request information about what the status of the investigation, whether it's been productive or unproductive, and any action taken. We were refused to respond any answer to that request as well. We have identified that this document came from within the IRS.
So your donors are confidential. That's protected by law. You have proof that the IRS leaked your confidential donor information to a group that opposes your point of view, and your donors were harassed as a result of that. Is that correct?
Yes.
All right, Ms. Martinick, right next door in Iowa, I work with groups very similar to what you do in Iowa. Your board members, the IRS told you that if your board signed a letter saying that they would no longer picket or protest on behalf of the pro-life movement at Planned Parenthood, that then they could receive their tax-exempt status. Is that correct?
That is correct.
So surrender your First Amendment rights, and then we might approve your application.
That is correct. She said it was ready to go through. Everything was in order, and as soon as they received that letter, the application would go through.
We have not heard any testimony that this is happening to groups that have the opposite views. So to suggest that these citizens are to blame for applying, I don't understand how one can make that conclusion. I yield.